So let's look at autism, which has had many different iterations or inventions. In the late 1800s, the word is first used in Europe to refer to introversion. It then becomes a word that refers to the symptoms of autism, of schizophrenia. In the mid-1900s, autism becomes linked with schizophrenia as its sort of childhood onset form. And the psychoanalytic paradigm, which was dominant in the 20th century in North America and Western Europe and South America, posited that people were autistic because they were reacting to problems between the relationship between mother and child. In the late 20th century, we have Asperger's initiated, accepted widely, and then eliminated. And today we have ASD, and increasingly the inclusion of comorbid conditions. The big difference between the mid-1900s and the late 20th century having to do with that category of idiopathic, where today many people have autism as a classification when in fact it is a comorbid condition associated with something else. But Leo Kanner, for example, in the mid-20th century did not diagnose with autism children who had intellectual disability or seizures. And yet we know that the incidence of intellectual disability and seizures with people with autism is significant. In addition to creating these new concepts or constructs, they also create new kinds of people. So the DSM creates new kinds of people. Asperger's created new kinds of people. Think about some of the people that we've created. Post-traumatic stress disorder, multiple personality disorder, fetal alcohol syndrome. People have always had trauma. There have always been people who've had severe dissociation, and women have always consumed alcohol, not all, but women have always consumed alcohol during pregnancy. What we've not always had is a group of experts who created these classifications, justified them as valid, integrated them into institutions, and then employed them by diagnosing individuals. Individuals who then may come to see themselves in terms of that diagnosis, which is why so many adults with autism reacted so strongly to the removal of Asperger's from the DSM last year, because this diagnostic category had shaped themselves, and removing it felt like an attack on their sense of self. Now, you'll sometimes have biomedical professionals, oncologists, obstetricians, neurologists, whoever, researchers on viruses and bacteria say, well, we don't have these cultural problems that you have about constructing new diagnoses and then getting rid of those diagnoses and interpreting them. They think of their disease constructs as stable and uniform and grounded in nature rather than culturally informed or historically contingent. But the rich metaphors that people give to employ meaning to these conditions tell us something different. AIDS as a plague, cancer as an evil, leprosy as corruption. And these examples show us that even conditions that one might think of as based on empirically verifiable phenomena, the ones you can see under a microscope or determine through a blood test, are always constituted by normative values. A woman is diagnosed with breast cancer. Her finances change. Her relationships with her family change. Her social networks may change. Many aspects of her life is disrupted. If she lives in a society that sees breast cancer as evidence of some sort of supernatural causation, she experiences one thing. If she sees it as having to do with genetics, quite another. If she lives in a society in which the breast gives a lot of meaning to her femininity, then she has another set of experiences. And in other words, this disease, as illness, as experience, is not written in the cells of the molecules of a tumor or a virus. In fact, scientific representations rarely come from purely scientific experimentation. Consider the concept of schizophrenia. Literally, schizein, to split, and phrene, mind. I would imagine that there are very few people today who would describe schizophrenia as a split mind. Yet that's what the term suggests. Did that come from science? Not really. It came from ideas in philosophy and literature. Works such as Faust, Frankenstein, The Picture of Dorian Gray, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There were two streams of thought in French, German, and British evolutionary work. Hypothesizing, number one, that variation in the world was the result of degeneration of the mind or disintegration of the mind into its parts. And another thought that the mind had developed as a binary that was held together only loosely and could split apart. Remarkably, more than 140 years after Dostoevsky wrote about the second self as the sign of the disintegration of the mind, even a cursory examination of advertisements in psychiatric journals yield representations of psychosis as a divided mind. Representations that owe their existence largely to European Romanticism and certainly not to any scientific discoveries. Such representations have real effects. They can contribute to the stigma people experience because representations can imply a theory of causation, or they can otherwise marginalize or give people a sense that they are damaged. Explanatory models can be deeply rooted in society, and changing them can actually have an effect. To give you one example, in 2004, the Japanese Society of Psychiatry and Neurology changed its term for schizophrenia from a word that meant split mind or mind split disease to integration disorder. And the renaming increased the percentage of cases in which patients were informed of the diagnosis from 36 to 69% in just 3 years. What makes autism so powerful if it's just a construction? Perhaps that something is the system of ordering to which I referred before, the ordering that is so much a part of the way our minds work. Autism in memoirs can possess a person. If you look at a lot of memoirs, it sounds like the person's soul has been lost or the person is possessed. Autism becomes codified, so it becomes a standardized part of our vocabulary. It ends up structuring a wide range of institutions and can even constitute a kind of culture, as some autistic self-advocates do, who see themselves in terms of autism, that autism is a way of life, mediated through distinctive skills and challenges. It becomes a site around which celebrities gather, and the media as well. I once heard a teaser on a commercial watching CNN in which Larry King said, "Is there an epidemic of autism? Join us tonight with comedian Bill Cosby and singer Toni Braxton." Once established, autism feeds an industry of therapists, complementary and alternative medicine, pharmaceuticals, special educators, special education programs, group homes, and other facilities that are established and maintained by government or nonprofit organizations. And all of these things depend on the continued availability of people classified as autistic. So once you set a diagnosis in place, it gains a lot of momentum. Look at James Gurney's data from the state of Minnesota public school system, which showed large increases year to year in the administrative prevalence of ASD in a single birth cohort. So all these children, this is just one group of children born in 1989, and their autism classifications increased every year, which is interesting for a disorder that is supposed to have its onset at the age of 36 months. It may be that higher numbers require more resources, but it may also be that more resources require more classifications, which in turn require more resources, and so on. if you look at a recent paper by Polyak et al. From Penn State, you find that in the United States, the proportion of children in special education programs ascertained under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act remained stable for 10 years. The proportion of children getting special education services was stable. Yet, autism increased 300%. So what that means is this stable proportion of children is having a reallocation of diagnoses, with the biggest drops being in emotional, intellectual disability and specific language disabilities. So one of the things that is certainly possible to conclude from what I've said in part one, of which I'm now concluding of my talk, is that when we start to see things differently, we take them for granted. And we also then start to see them more frequently. You're thinking of buying a particular model of car, and you test drive it. And over the next 2 weeks, you see it everywhere. You're pregnant, and all of a sudden, everybody looks pregnant. You see pregnant people everywhere, right? There is something fundamentally happening here where when we're primed to see something, we start to look for it and see it. It's not to cast a value judgment on this and say that there are people going around the halls of schools looking for autistic kids and diagnosing it where it didn't exist before, but rather to become attuned to this classification and then to understand people in terms of it. I mean, here's something you see every day, right? A FedEx logo, and you see it on the commercials, TV, trucks, your envelopes, and whatever. But lots of people don't see something hidden within it, which is the arrow that is in the negative space, which I've colored in yellow here. You go back to the original, and your eye goes straight to it. And over the next few weeks, and perhaps years, you are going to see this logo, and your eye's going to go like a laser to it. You're never going to see this the same, and it's not because that arrow was missing and it just popped up. That arrow was there all along. Again, you weren't primed to see it. We are primed today to see things in terms of autism. We're primed today to use that as a framework for understanding people. And if it has a positive effect, if it gets people services that they never got before, more power to it. But we need to understand that our own constructs are changeable, that they're temporary, that they are here for a particular reason. Any diagnostic category is only as good as the benefit it provides.